strategies and concepts discussed are for educational purposes only and do not represent specific investment, tax, or estate planning advice. Investing carries an inherent element of risk, and it is in everyone's best interest to consult a tax, legal, or investment professional. Beth Williams is an investment advisor representative of, and advisory services are offered through USA Financial Securities Corp., a registered investment advisor. Megan Carney, Megan S. Carney PLLC, and Financial Arc Builders are not affiliated with USA Financial Securities Corp.
Welcome to Money Healing. I'm your co-host, Beth Williams.
And I'm your other co-host, Megan Carney. We're here to talk about money and our feelings related to it. I'm a psychologist who specializes in helping sensitive people.
And I'm a financial planner. We both talk to everyday people just like you about these topics.
Everyone's mental health and money health journeys are so different. And as unique as we all are, there are some common themes when it comes to how our emotions impact our money and vice versa.
And it's those common themes that we are going to be discussing together, both the themes themselves and some ideas from us about how to move forward and heal your relationship with money. Welcome back to this episode of Money Healing. In these next couple of episodes, we're going to be dealing with some various odds and ends, I would say, based off of some feedback that we've gotten from our audience. Thank you for those comments. One that we're going to tackle in this episode is I procrastinate. I'm procrastinating getting financial help. I'm procrastinating taking the next step in my financial picture. We've fallen into a bit of how these could be people that know their numbers, these could be people who don't, and so we're just going to be unpacking procrastination and where some of that comes from. So Megan, for all of us, let's start with defining what is procrastination.
Well, procrastination is just really delaying doing something that you know you need to do. And oftentimes, like, there's a deadline on the thing and you're waiting until just at the deadline and then you do it. Like filing taxes. Everybody waits until the last possible moment, not everybody, but a lot of us do, to file taxes. And that's a great example of, in a financial situation, procrastinating.
So in prep, you had talked about how maybe what have I seen from client perspectives, and I have seen people saying like, "Oh, I really want to work with you," and then nothing happens. And some of that we have already touched on in previous episodes, but I have had a few people admit that they're procrastinating or telling me that I need to set a deadline for them in order to get something done. And oftentimes when it comes to our financial picture, I struggle with that because there's not always a deadline. And especially in financial planning, I run into this with clients who are CPAs or with my fellow colleagues, and we'll be working on a case. And I've had a lot of CPAs come to me or other tax professionals and say, why aren't my clients doing financial planning? I've been talking to them for years about trying to get together with you. And I said, simply, there's no deadline. I think that that's part of the problem. And yet I can't really do that for you. So that's one thing that I've run into is that I have to set a deadline, even if there's no deadline actually there. So I'm kind of curious, do you think maybe there are some common reasons for procrastinating?
There are so many common reasons for procrastinating. And I want to start with these people who know that they need a deadline. First of all, like, that's super insightful for them to realize if you don't give me a deadline, I'm not going to do it because it's not going to be prioritized enough. And that could be one of the issues, right? It's just not a priority yet. And one of the things that I automatically think of with people who need a solid deadline, even for things that don't necessarily need deadlines, is ADHD. With ADHD, the things that tend to be motivating are things that are new, things that are interesting, things where like there's some sort of competition, like, ooh, who can get this done faster? Or you're running up against a deadline. Like it has to happen. Those are some of the things that help ADHDers get shit done. And a big one is having a deadline and have somebody holding them accountable to that deadline.
Which is really difficult when it comes to financial planning.
Well, we can make deadlines though, right? Like maybe we know a reason why they want to get in and see you or talk about this certain thing. Like maybe they want to make sure they have X amount of money set aside by the end of the year. Like there's a shorter term goal that we know that they want. Well, that's not going to happen if they don't get in with you by a certain time, right? So you can create a deadline there. Say, hey, if you want to have this by the end of the year, I need this by, I don't know, July.
Honestly, part of that is I don't love setting deadlines for people who don't need them. Partially because I have gotten some feedback that they feel pressured, they feel shamed, they feel like I'm giving them unnecessary anxiety, which as someone myself who doesn't need deadlines and I myself don't do a lot of procrastination, I would feel that way too. If someone put a deadline on me and it didn't actually need to have that deadline, that just adds in extra stress for me.
Yeah, and in my family, we kind of need a deadline.
Do you find that it's just ADHD that could be causing some of this, or what do you think are maybe some other reasons?
Well, it's definitely not just ADHD. And I want to go back to something you said about not wanting to like push deadlines on people who don't need them or want them. Like, it's okay to just ask your clients, like, do you want a deadline on this? Do you need a deadline on this? I would say another really, really big thing that comes up with procrastinating is perfectionism. People are worried about doing it right, seeing the right person, getting the right stuff in, whatever perfectionism looks like in the particular situation that you're in. When we're worried about getting it perfect instead of done, it tends to not happen because we procrastinate and say like, oh, I can't get it perfect yet. I can't get it just right yet. So I'm not going to do it at all. And I think that's a really easy thing to do with financial planning is because there's just so much information that you need as a financial planner. Like I know our situation is not set up perfectly at the moment. And I know that like there is a lot of good information in it. And so it is good enough. I'm not letting my perfectionism get in the way of having some sort of plan. Because if I waited until I had like every single piece of information to submit before submitting anything, then I could be spending, I don't know, years. I think we still have a retirement account. Maybe that got taken care of, but we were just having like tons and tons of trouble getting switched over. If we would have waited for that, like that would have set us back a whole year.
Part of the problem maybe with financial planning is that it's never going to be perfect, mostly because things change. Things change so rapidly and they change so quick. And that is one of the reasons that we take a higher level view and not necessarily a day-to-day view. Like for a budgeting issue, that would be a day-to-day kind of issue. And typically we're looking at year over year numbers, not day over day numbers. And so I think for me, at least, there's this expectation that it's never going to be perfect. And that's kind of the fun of my job, I think, is that things change and that we can adjust it, but we can also take a larger picture. We have a saying in our industry that what we measure grows.
Mhm.
And the reason that we use that so heavily when it comes to financial planning is if I don't have a starting point, I don't know how I've done on a measurement scale. And this could be how much I'm saving, how much I'm spending, how much I'm putting away for retirement, whatever it would be. There's no way of being able to know how things are growing or things are not going if I don't have a starting point. And in our financial planning process, we try very hard to get someone, when we're building an arc, we try to get someone to what we call a coordinates point. You are here. We're not making any changes yet. We just need to know, is this where we're at roughly? And then that's where we go from there. And typically it's honestly a lot easier for us as a professional to get there, but we do run into some problems when it comes to that procrastination.
Are there like particular things that you find people really get stuck on with procrastinating?
It usually is homework items. It would be homework items that may or may not need to be done right now. Those would be a simple thing like updating your address. I understand if you move, it is really hard to update your address. I've done that a lot, and it is really hard to just be like, oh no, I have to get that paper in, or I have to get this form filled out. We have that same thing with beneficiary changes. If somebody needs to just do some basic, one form to sign something. And then there's also when it comes to trying to get new coordinates points, new information about where we're at and getting updated numbers, there is a lot of procrastination when it comes to that. And typically, if I tell someone that I'm going to need it in a couple of weeks, or if I don't hear back from you, I'm going to follow up in a couple of weeks, I typically know my clients well enough to know if they need to have that in an email or not. And usually just a simple ping is enough, but sometimes there is a little bit more of a, oh, nope, I just haven't gotten that done.
Sometimes we label it procrastination when it really just genuinely isn't a priority, too. And so I know I do this where it's like I'm so overwhelmed. There are so many other more immediate important things to do right now that like this is going to go on the back burner until I have the brain space to do it if it's something that requires brain space, or like I will just genuinely forget about it because there's just not the brain space for it to be there, for it to register. I'll see the email pop up and I'll be like, oh yeah, I'll get that later when I have time.
Which I love that you say that, because I think that prioritizing things is super important. And there's not always the right time to do financial planning, and it's okay to make, time for that later. And when you are doing too much at once, I think that might just be overwhelming you a little bit. And so oftentimes when it comes to someone coming to us just for a first meeting and saying, yes, I want to do financial planning, I honestly don't know a single person that doesn't want to do financial planning, but they don't because it could just be a priority issue. And so I don't take offense to that at all. That's not a problem. If it's not a priority right now, that's okay.
Mhm. That, and there is a piece of this of like, if you haven't prioritized your own finances, your financial circumstances, your financial future for an extended period of time, and it's because you're prioritizing other people, like that's reflecting something back to you, right? That's saying you're not prioritizing yourself because your financial future is your life, right? It's how you're going to live in the future. And so if we're not prioritizing it for a little bit because we're in the midst of something like a big move, fine. If we're not prioritizing it for years, there's probably something else going on.
So what do you think some of those are? I mean, we've talked a little bit about, where the reasons for procrastinating are coming from. I myself have heard that it could be a trauma response. I'm not entirely sure. In prep, we were talking about how I'd read this thing online where it had said that people who procrastinate tend to have high levels of anxiety as well as poor impulse control. So I know that's a lot. What do you have to say on all of it?
Well, first, poor impulse control is a trait of ADHD. And so that's one of those correlation does not equal causation type of things. You can just hear the nerd in me right now. But just because two things happen at the same time doesn't mean one's causing the other. It's just that's a commonality with ADHD. And I don't think it's actually the impulsivity that's making somebody procrastinate. You also said the trauma response can cause procrastination. And that's right. And I also think that for some people, it's not as simple as procrastination. For some people, it is an actual trauma response that is happening. They are going into freeze mode when they're triggered by what I'm assuming is a financial trauma.
And we've talked about this before about what some financial traumas could be. And I do think that that's a very important thing for me as a planner to know when I'm talking with someone who has had a financial trauma of some sort, just unpacking the fact that they may not even realize that that's what had happened. I've had this a couple of times with clients that have grown up poor, being one of the more common financial traumas. And it is very difficult for them to set an appointment or set something up because they are sure I'm going to tell them that they're broke. And that is usually, I think, a trauma response, specifically when it comes to trying to set up an appointment.
Yeah. And so for you on your end, that might feel like, oh, they're just procrastinating. But on their end, it is a genuine frozen trauma response. I cannot bring myself to do that.
Which honestly, and we've talked about this before, but one, I guess, in this loose ends kind of wrap up, one thing that I will say for other financial professionals is I understand, very difficult to understand that we're not really a therapist, but we're also kind of in that space a little bit. You're dealing with some issues that are very emotionally driven, and you're dealing with some topics that are very traumatizing. And understanding being trauma informed is, I think, a huge step to just understanding that there's a bit more going on. And so when you have a client that's not reaching out or they are procrastinating, I think sitting with that and being curious about where the client is at and just approaching them on a human to human level. We ourselves know that we've got financial traumas. I don't know that I've run into anybody that doesn't have one. And it's not a competition. It doesn't mean that, if you've got something that's minor, that compares to growing up in a war zone. It's not a competition, but just approaching the client as a human and asking on a human to human level, what's going on? How can I help? I think is a really big space saver to be able to give that space and be able to build that out for that client and just be there with them. They're just human too.
That transparency and choice are the biggest. I mean, we could do a whole more than an episode about what it looks like to be trauma informed. But transparency, choice, and being like just a genuine, caring human go a long way for being trauma informed.
When it comes to someone who is dealing with procrastination, how do you think that you would define whether that's a procrastination versus a prioritization? I know we kind of already talked about that, but how would you better define that?
I would say the length of time. And I don't know that there's a hard answer for that, right? But like I was saying earlier, if you're prioritizing everyone else's stuff, that's the red flag for me, that like, hey, let's take care of you too. This is procrastinating, taking care of yourself.
I personally think that I would go back to values. And I know we've talked ad nauseum about this, but if you understand that that's in line with your value system, you take a 20,000-foot view of your life and realizing what voices are pushing you and what voices are you allowing in And if you think that dealing with your financial picture is actually a huge priority versus, I don't know, trying a meal plan, there's a lot of different options out there. But being able to try to figure out what are the priorities for you first and then going through would probably be a really good first step. What do you think?
I think that might be tricky for some people because a lot of people have these assumptions about what money means, as we've talked about in previous episodes. And so it's hard for a lot of people to say that like they value having money. And I would want to encourage people to consider that like this is just part of your wellness picture, right? We think about our physical health. We think a lot more these days about our emotional health. But our financial health is also important, right? And so if we think about it as just a health factor, a future health, then we can think about, okay, what is this money really going to do for me? Like, what do I want it for? Please go back to that episode if you don't know what you want your money for. And then you can start digging into the values piece of it and help you see that prioritizing planning for your financial future is really prioritizing yourself, your self-care, probably also prioritizing caring for your family in the future or causes that you might want to donate to in the future or donate more to than you already do. There is no shame in wanting to have safety in your financial future or even abundance in your financial future.
I think it's almost like an offense versus defense approach. So, for instance, as you've talked about for tax deadlines, I get a lot of clients engaging with me when they start thinking about their money. And there's really 2 times of the year that happens based on a calendar year here in the United States. And those are during tax seasons and when school comes back into session. So basically the summer and holiday seasons are the 2 times where no one is really thinking about their money. They're out spending it probably as they should. And they're not thinking about those issues. When it comes to financial planning, we're looking ahead, and we've used this analogy in several different episodes, but my job is to look out of the front window. And when you're just responding out of a defensive thing to try to get your taxes done and just get it done as quickly as you can and go about your business, being proactive and being offensive about trying to get ahead of the financial planning, I'm looking 2 and 3 years at least ahead on your tax situation with your tax professional. And I think there's a lot of benefits for it. I will also say, and we've talked about this in other episodes too, as the study out of MIT has said, there's 4 phases of 8,000 days each in a person's life. And those are about 22 years each. Again, you can reference our previous episodes for that as well in more detail. But each one of those phases has something completely different for your financial picture. I get completely different questions for each one of those phases. That one phase coming out of the dependent phase, so you're like 22 to 44 years old, and this isn't perfect, it's different for everybody. But during that period of time, you're in what we call the consuming phase. You are changing careers, you're getting your career settled, you are having to change out your beater car, and really during that time, that's when I hear I'm living paycheck to paycheck. And it's typically not until your children are out of their own dependent phase that I start to get people that come to me and say, I really need to get financial planning done. And so I honestly don't really even expect someone to come to me before their child is in college, or graduated high school, to try to engage, proactively on financial planning. And it's just because at that point, you're so bogged down with child activities and graduations, and there's just so much going on. And you just might not have the priority. You want to get financial planning done, but it might just not be the right time. And so I try not to judge people, and looking at their financial picture on, oh, you should have done this 10 years ago. That's really not fair. And typically, if you're coming to me at 45 or even 65 and saying, hey, I need to get some planning done, that's pretty normal.
What a gift for the people who can make it in earlier while they still have kids and can be thinking about like saving for college and those types of things, right? Like, we don't have to wait. I think sometimes the procrastination can be an excuse, right? Saying we don't have enough time can be an excuse. We're actually just prioritizing other things and not prioritizing this. And you get to choose how much of a priority financial planning is to you. And maybe it's not right now. Maybe it's in a year. Maybe it's in 5 years. Maybe it's in 10 years. Maybe it was 10 years ago and you're like, shit, I have to get on this. No judgment. Like, get in when it really is a priority for you, and it really is not that time consuming, honestly, at least not on the client end.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Money Healing. I hope that this helped to answer some questions about I Procrastinate. For this next episode, again, we're going to be doing some kind of odds and ends and some wrapping up. We're going to be talking about how to find your money story. To reference back, you can look back on episode 2 and 3 for Megan and I. We share our financial stories with you, and that'll help to try to key off some of this conversation. But we'll be dealing with how to deal with that on your side and how to find your money story.